Welcome to today's Community Cast. My name is Matt Morgan. I'm the pastor at Community Brookside, a new church plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We are so blessed by your presence, and we hope that today's content will bring you joy. Well, we are doing another special edition of the Community Podcast with Rich Gable, with Amanda Arthur, and myself, Matt Morgan. And today we're going to be talking about a controversial issue that I think many of us have strong feelings for or against. Either way, strong feelings for or against. And just a little background, the reason we're having this conversation today is because we're in the middle of a sermon series called Confronting the Controversies, based on Adam Hamilton's book of the same title. And it got our staff having conversations about some of the things that we think might be controversial and or noteworthy to talk about. So Amanda had some pretty strong feelings for this as a response. And so, Miss Amanda, what are we talking about today?
So we are talking about purity culture, and mainly like 90s purity culture. I grew up in the church. I attended youth group, and my parents were divorced growing up. So I attended one denomination with my father and then the Methodist church with my mother. So the other denomination had very strong feelings and ties towards the purity culture that was presented in the late 90s and early 2000s. So it's been an interesting journey growing up with that and seeing how teen girls navigated that through the church, or at least how I did and some of my friends.
Okay. So interesting, Rich. Did you catch that she said teen girls?
Oh, yes.
Not
yes.
teen boys.
Yes.
In all clarity, I was a youth pastor in the early 2000s and going forward, and was, I'll talk about that here in a minute. But one of the things I noticed during your conversation and in my experience was that many of these True Love Waits and or other purity events were very much focused towards young women. Was that your experience, or did I just...
No, you are absolutely spot on. We would have like this weekend retreat, and we would go to somebody's house, and you'd pack your bags, and it's like a big sleepover, and we'd have like group sessions together with some of the guys, but mainly it was like the girls were separated and the boys were separated, and then we'd talk about how we needed to protect ourselves at all costs and guard our virginity. And you should not be having these impure thoughts, even though you're a teen growing up.
Right.
And it's the 90s. And you look at 17 magazine, you look at YM, you look at, all the other things. But, how dare you have feelings and stirrings that are completely human and natural, but don't have them.
I don't know. I don't think they're human or natural. I never experienced any sort of lustful thoughts or
Nope.
As a teen boy, it was never a struggle for me.
Right.
And this is what I find just incredibly humorous. Like, we spent so much time and so many resources on making sure that women, like you say, protected their virginity, when really I think the conversation was totally missed on the young men who were the ones who were threatening their purity, right? Rich, did you have any encounters or experiences at all with this purity movement when you were younger?
Yeah, I think mine came a little bit later, actually. I was not involved with youth group a lot, but I just because I didn't like teenagers when I was one.
He still doesn't like teenagers.
I still don't, and I have one at home. No, I'm kidding. No, it was interesting because being a church musician, I played for a lot of camps. So, it was all the same. The rhetoric was all the same. You heard over and over, especially about when we're talking about clothing, at summer camps.
Yeah.
You hear over and over and over, girls, make sure that you don't show any skin, make sure that your shorts aren't too short, and make sure this is covered and that's covered. And then all while the guys are literally playing basketball in their athletic shorts, and that's it. So I began to kind of see this inconsistency in what the girls were being told versus what the guys were being told, and it all became pointed at, well, girls, you don't want to make the guys stumble. It was never.
Oh gosh. So you're putting the full responsibility of a man's lustful thoughts
Exactly.
on young women.
Yeah.
Too.
What and it goes into that, well, she was asking for it. You should have seen what she was wearing. And I just started to see that as absolutely terrible. This is not based on what we should not be chastising the females for what they're wearing. We should be teaching the men to be accountable for their own thoughts and how they
respectful of women, no matter how they're dressed.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So that was my experience.
And as a girl trying to shop for those church camps,
Yeah.
it is practically impossible to find shorts, especially if you have long legs, that only come 2 inches or 3 inches above your knee.
Yeah.
Nowadays, forget finding shorts that long. You might as well just get like pants. But
Those are capris.
the capris. Or we were told that we had to wear t-shirts over our bathing suits.
Yep. So that was a conversation I was going to have. My wife and I got into so many arguments as I am literally a youth pastor caught in the bureaucracy of making sure the camp runs well and following the rules. So I had to tell my young women, hey, make sure if you bring a swimsuit, if you're planning on swimming, it's a one piece, right? Can't have a two piece because those are from Satan. And once you put that one piece on, you then also have to have a cover-up shirt on. And Nicole would look at me and tell me how awfully unfair that is. And I'm like, I know this. I absolutely recognize it because, again, like you say, it wasn't just the fact that the boys were playing basketball with their shirts off. Yeah. They were swimming with their shirts off. Yeah. God forbid a woman ever have a lustful thought, right? Because these guys were 3/4 naked.
Yeah.
And that was totally fine, while women definitely had. It was almost rich, like you were saying. I almost picked up this undertone of that the church might, in fact, have a double standard with. There's a lot of things that I regret about my time in youth ministry, and one of those is not speaking up for the fairness involved in the dressing of young ladies at camp. It was awful.
What an opportunity missed. I saw an article once about that, and this, and I'll have to look it up at some point. But it was someone who was a youth pastor, and he was talking about that very thing, about two pieces in church camps. He was like, the argument was made: what better time to teach young men how to respect, no matter what our female counterparts at the camp are wearing. I think that was a huge missed opportunity for church camps all over the place to just be like, guys, you're going to see skin. You're going to see your like your friends in two pieces and things like that. Here's how you still respect them and treat them like the humans that they are, and not as this lustful object that because I think it actually is harmful to guys, because at that point it's like you're saying everything. You're actually labeling that skin as being sinful, as like, now whenever you do see someone in a two-piece, then it's like it becomes that much more
Pavlov
of a
dog.
Exactly. Now it's like, oh my gosh, like there's a belly button. It's like where at church camp you're told like, oh, you can't show that, you can't, so I think even for a man it's damaging, because you get to the point where that stuff was so taboo, and it's like, no, a belly button should not be taboo. That's something that we should be able to see and not go.
Do you remember the days when ankles were were the deal? Like, back in the Victorian era, dresses had to cover ankles, otherwise it was like a huge scandal. Yeah. So Amanda, as a young person who was going to these camps and experiencing life change in the midst of your three-piece suit, how I mean, what are some of your memories of church camps? I mean,
so the church camps, of course, I attended, the Methodist church camp, and then I also attended different denomination church camp. And they were very different. but I remember like these retreat weekends that we would have for
the purity
the
events
purity
themselves.
events. Yeah. So it was, they'd gather all of us girls together, and they would, our virginity is the most important thing we could ever give to our husband.
Right.
And if you ruin that, oh my gosh, you are going to burn in hell. And how dare you do that to your husband? If you give your virginity away, then you have just done the most horrible, awful, vile thing to your husband. How could you do that to your husband? I was 14.
Yeah.
Not when
Perspective.
not during these retreats, not when I decided to make adult choices, but telling that to a teenager growing up of like, this is the most precious thing you could ever give your husband. Well, what about intelligence? What about kindness? What about all the other important things? Why is virginity the only prized thing that a woman could ever give her husband? Like, that always just kind of sat wrong with me. Like, there's so many other qualities than just being a virgin.
Well, and if we think about it, virginity lasts, well, it doesn't last for, lasting. Yeah, I'm not talking about
Right.
that. I'm talking specifically about it's fleeting. You know what I mean? Like, you experience this one time.
It's a one and done.
Right. And then after that, I mean, are we just no longer going to appreciate the women that we have married as men who've waited for this pure woman? Like, okay, I've gotten that treasure. I don't know. Yeah, it definitely sets it up for a rocky potential relationship. I mean, and again, think about the damage that's done for young men and women who did not wait to get married.
Exactly.
And how, if their opposite partner was told, hey, you should find somebody who's offered this gift for her husband. And, you fall in love with somebody only to find out that they have committed this adulterous, treasonous sin against the message of Jesus. Well, how in the world do you come back from that, right?
And it's a long road coming back because you feel like you have nothing to offer.
Right.
You think you are complete garbage and you are complete trash and you have nothing to offer anyone or anybody, and no man is ever going to want you because of one choice that you made.
Right.
So
I'm reading some of these articles as, in preparation for today, and somebody used this conversation about chewing gum as like comparing a woman to chewing gum, which I think is incredibly disrespectful and relatively short-sighted. But, this idea of, a piece of chewing gum and its wrapper is desirable, but nobody wants to chew already chewed bubble gum. Like, are you kidding me? Just the comparisons that we make when it comes to sexuality are nonsensical, honestly. Let me read a scripture. I know that we've kind of already jumped into the topic, but I want to read this to everybody who's listening. And this is kind of the basis for where a lot of this purity culture came from. It comes from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 3 through 8. And here's what it says. It's God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. The Lord will punish all those who commit such sins, as we told you and warned you before. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Therefore, anyone who rejects this instruction does not reject a human being, but God, the very God who gives you his Holy Spirit. So if you commit the adulterous act of sex before marriage, you now have rejected God, right?
and that was completely what they told us at these weekends.
Yeah.
And so it really it wasn't a good thing for a lot of girls growing up.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a bit of a story. I moved from Oklahoma City back to the Tulsa area in the end of 2005. So it was December 2005. Started a job at a new church. It, at the time, was United Methodist. It has since then disaffiliated. But this church I spent 11 years there. It was a wonderful experience for the most part. Obviously, there was some pushback. But the first event that happened at this youth group was that the adults had prepared one of these weekend retreats for these students. And so I was 25 at the time, and the purity culture thought mentality I had already kind of come out of. and I'll tell you more about that here in a moment. But it was 20 days into this new journey at this new church where we had this weekend event. And of course, all the ladies who were helping to organize it were like, oh, we'll have 2 different groups of girls stay at this house and at this house, but we just don't have a place to take the guys. And I'm like, well, I can have them over at my house. It's a 2-bedroom, tiny house in Midtown Tulsa. At this point, I'll just have them at my house and we can do the retreat stuff for them here. And we gathered together at some of these big events at another church in Broken Arrow. And it was not just our church specifically. It was a group of churches and their youth groups together. And when we had these group trainings, I don't remember much about the group stuff individually, but I remember checking on the young ladies and hearing their stories. Every one of them were gifted a little fishing line necklace with a pearl on it. Mm-hmm. And the pearl represented their value, right?
Mm-hmm. I had a purity ring.
You had a purity? Okay. Mm-hmm. So we did the purity rings after this event, and I'll tell you more about that here in a second. But the boys, I sat through the boys' sessions with our students, so I didn't get to sit with the girls and hear what they were learning, but it sounded like all of them had memorized scripture, and they talked about, no, you can't have my pearl. It was really, they were getting a lot out of it. In the boys' sessions, I remember having conversations about when you walk into a restroom, which urinal do you choose? I remember we literally spent 45 minutes duct taping. We broke down into small groups and we duct taped young men to the wall. And you know what I mean? There was incredible substance, it sounded like, in the young ladies' training, and conversational and powerful. They remembered it for a long time. But the dudes were like, now I know which urinal to use and how to duct tape my friend to a wall. It just was, there was no substance. So even in the midst of this purity training, you are here to keep these kids from making decisions that could potentially impact them forever. And you are very intentional about the women. It's their responsibility. It's all on them. It's all on them. It's all on them. And then the guys are just, let's have a good time.
Yep.
So purity ring, you had one.
I had a purity ring, and it was a big ceremony. My parents gave it to me. It was a little gold band, and it had a pearl with 2 little hands that wrapped around the pearl, holding that precious pearl.
Clutching your pearl.
Exactly. And so, it went on your 3rd finger of your left hand, and that's, that was there for your husband. When your husband proposed to you, or your soon-to-be husband put your engagement ring on, you could take your purity ring off.
Well, that seems a little short-sighted because it's pre-marriage, so...
I know. But
how is this supposed to work?
I know, right. So, but yes, with all the education and the training and things like that went on the girls' side, I would have liked to have seen something about if something happens, where do you go after that? And I think that is a conversation that needs to happen, because sometimes there are choices that are made, and they're right or they're wrong, but they are made in the moment. And so I think knowing where to go after that, and knowing that a woman still has value, and she is not only defined by her purity or her virginity or lack of.
Rich, purity ring, did you have?
I did not.
Necklace, belt?
No, I did not.
Okay. So I will tell you, here was an interesting story. I was in the 8th grade, and I was dating a girl named Becky, and I was United Methodist my whole life, and she was an Assembly of God, First Assembly of Owasso. It was, one of the larger churches in our area, and she came back from this True Love Waits weekend and gave me a purity ring. I had not made this commitment. I did not have any sort of training. I didn't know. And I was like, sure. And so I wore this purity ring all through high school, and was pure all through high school, and then wore it for another 2 years after I wasn't, because I was so embarrassed and ashamed, because everybody knew that ring meant that I was keeping my sexuality to myself until I was married.
Yeah, and same thing happened for me. I wore mine long after.
Yeah.
And this is a surprising story, but I wore mine clear up until college, and Being a woman, in college, you have to go to the doctor for a variety of reasons, but it was time that I went to see the lady doctor, and they had asked me if I had made life choices. And at that point, my mother was in the room with me.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, Mom, you can leave. It's cool. You can leave. Like, I got this. Anyway, so she leaves. The nurse continues to ask questions. And at that point, I break down sobbing in the doctor's office because I feel like a complete piece of garbage.
Yeah.
Because what am I going to offer my husband? And I remember telling the nurse, I can't wear white on my wedding day.
Oh, gosh.
And it was really traumatic because of all these messages that had been coming at me for years and years and years. And when you're a woman and you're told that that's all you offer, that's a terrible thing. I have so much more to me that I offer than that. But it was, I ran out of the doctor's office.
Yeah.
So I could not finish the examination. So but it was pretty traumatic.
You know, to be honest and to be clear, I think the church moved that direction because I think ideally we want our teenagers to have the most fulfilling lives possible. And oftentimes, if you're a 15-year-old who's pregnant, that's not the best, right?
Life gets hard.
Right, it does. And you know, obviously STDs, and again, like we mentioned earlier, I think a lot of this purity culture was a response to the AIDS crisis in the 80s. So, you know, the church was trying to find a way to help teenagers come out of their most aggressively sexual times and try to still, you know, not be disease ridden, not have children, you know, live their lives for God. And I think the message just got mixed up. You know, I think with all intents and purposes, it was done as a way to help and you know, heal and protect. But at the same point, I think the message got twisted.
I think so. I think they did the best they could at the time that they could. And maybe they didn't think about later on how this would affect ladies, women. And I come in contact with women a lot that have these feelings of I am not a desirable woman. There's nothing sexy about me. There's nothing lovely about me. You know, I'm here to make babies, and that's it. But I do think the church did the best that they could at the time they did, but maybe needed some more thought into that.
Yeah. And here's the crazy thing, like sexuality is a huge issue always. And I'm going to just say that as a blanket statement. Like it's not something that, you know, I was reading articles like there's this understanding that the purity ring culture, like literally putting on a ring, started in ancient Roman times. It was with these Vestal prostitutes, Vestal virgins who were, you know, labeled virgins, but they weren't. They were actually temple prostitutes. And that when the Roman Empire struggled, when it fell to the barbarians, it was because of these these virgins were not sexually pure. So they had to have like this commitment ceremony to this Roman god, and they all wore these rings. And that's kind of where we hearkened it back to. And I don't know how much truth there is into that. But just the idea of us making a marital style commitment to Jesus, that was how it was presented to me, is a little weird. I mean, that's all I got on that. But Nicole and I, this early in the fall, it was August, we went to the Berkshires because we went to go watch the Tulsa Ballet perform. And it was awesome. It was a great experience. The town that we were in used to, in the 1930s, I think. I can't remember exactly the dates, and I meant to ask Nicole before I left the house. But they had this beautiful old hotel that was like one of those picturesque 1920s, you know, hotels that were just ornate and beautiful. And anyway, towards the end of the 20s into the Depression era, the hotel began to become less used. However, it was this retreat for like some of the Hollywood elite to come and spend time in the Berkshires. They would come and have summer parties there and whatnot. Well, eventually, because it began to be in a state of disrepair, young people would go and they would park their cars out in the woods kind of near this hotel. And it was the winter of, I want to say like 38 or something like that, or 28. I can't remember. That during the winter, the hotel was kind of blocked off and like you can't really access the hotel. They didn't have any guests, and the water for the whole building was shut off and had frozen. A couple of teenagers in their car went for a park session and then eventually dropped a cigarette out the window, and it burnt the whole hotel to the ground because a couple of teenagers were a little frisky, in the woods nearby. So and that was in the 1920s and 30s, that these young people would take their cars and go do that kind of thing. And let me just tell you, it is the same nowadays. I'm worried. Nicole and I are starting to have conversations about, will my kids end up parked down a street somewhere trying to make out, and it's weird to have those conversations, but my kids are pretty young still. But at the same point, my daughter is starting to date. My son is not really interested in anybody yet, but, my daughter is at the age when I met Nicole and we hit it off. I mean, Nicole was significantly younger than me, and it wasn't like a really intense relationship then. It was later. But anyway, that's a whole nother story for a whole nother event. But I don't know about you guys. Do you worry about your kids? I mean, we all have kids. Just to be clear, we're all pretty close to the same age. And we all have kids in the same age range. Are you guys worried about that with yours? And follow-up question, are you as worried about your boys, Amanda, as Rich, you are about your daughter? Fight it out. Who's more concerned?
I think my wife and I are very intentional about how we talk to our daughter. And yes, I mean, those choices are big choices, not taking anything away from that. But I think more than anything, we try to tell stories and to use sermon illustrations. Matt, you had a sermon several months back about David and Bathsheba. And that was a very important topic for our family. We just kind of our lives. Jamie and I have heard many, many, many times over the course of our marriage, women saying things like, "Well, I don't want to wear that because I don't want to be a Bathsheba. I don't want to be that
provocative,
sultry." Yeah, exactly. That very provocative, sultry, being that makes men stumble. And it's well, let's really look at that narrative in the Bible. That wasn't her doing anything out of what she should have been doing. She was bathing on her roof, which was customary at the time.
So just to be clear, he was on his roof looking out over.
Right.
So
sure.
She was not on the roof.
Okay.
He was. But not everybody, but a lot of people.
Yeah. It was not uncommon.
Yes. You're right. She was doing exactly what she needed to be doing.
Yeah. Not uncommon for her to be doing that. In that day they had public bathhouses for, goodness sake. But in that story, the takeaway for so many women was, oh my God, I don't want to be that woman who provokes lust. And it's wait. We are very much missing the point here. The man has just as much, even more so, of a context and fault for doing what he did in the story, that moment. Yeah. So that's as parents of a teenage daughter, that's kind of what we're instilling in our daughter is no, you don't want to be a purposeful stumbling block for someone, but at the same time, put the fault where the fault is due.
Yeah.
And I know she's going to make decisions, good and bad, and ultimately what we're teaching her is that we love her no matter what, and the church loves her no matter what.
Right.
And she is 100% welcome and loved no matter what those decisions are. And I think that's where we've ended up.
Okay. So Amanda, you worried about the boys?
I know, just like Rich, said that his child is going to make decisions, good and bad, and I am fully anticipating good and bad decisions out of the boys. So, but growing up, we've always told them, no means no. If somebody says no, that means no.
So I think this has to be addressed. So let's make a point to come back to this because
yes.
Yeah. All right. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay. And so as they've grown up, I'm always very pro-feminine, not feminist movement, but pro-feminine of, embrace your body. Yeah. With that,
it's hard to have these conversations. First of all, we're sitting in a church doing a podcast about the church's understanding of sexuality between, man and woman. That's specifically our topic today. And I say man and woman specifically because that's the issue that we are talking about in this moment. Yeah. There are other issues, not necessarily revolving men and women, that we'll talk about probably in another podcast. But even where we're sitting, I think tends to edit how we talk about these things.
A lot of times. Yes.
So I just want to mention that and know that I'm hearing bits and pieces of what you're saying and recognizing you probably say it a little bit differently if we were not here.
Probably so.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. But with the boys, I know they're going to make choices, and I want them to know that they're loved, and I want them to know the consequences, good and bad, of the choices that they make, and that I will always love them. There's nothing they could ever do that would stop my love for them or God's love for them. And that when they are ready to make choices, that they really think about it. And that they fully understand everything that it encompasses.
Yeah. So I have to say that my response after going to this True Love Waits event, when I was 25 and in youth ministry and, leading these kids through it, I decided in that moment I was going to shift how I talked about sex with teenagers. And let me be clear. I feel like as a youth pastor, and I did youth ministry for 17 years, so many parents made it my responsibility to teach their kids about sex. And first of all, I don't think that's fair because parents should know their kids way more than their youth pastor does. I mean, I had kids telling me about their sexual experiences that I did not want to know. But they would never ever tell their parents kind of those things. And so I shifted how I taught sex. And I wanted to make sure that our kids, I never really promoted necessarily this True Love Waits or this purity culture tagline of, wait until you're married, present your spouse, your absolute purest best, blah, 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 blah. And I think part of that was I felt like I couldn't preach it because I didn't live it. I mean, I tried for a long time and messed up and felt awful. And I didn't want other people to feel that same experience. So I began to tell our students, are you ready, young people, to deal with constant itching and burning for the rest of your life? Oh, you're not? Oh, are you ready as a 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old? Are you ready to raise another human being? Because if you're not, then you shouldn't be doing the acts that lead to those things. And so I began to approach it in kind of a realistic term and say, if you're not ready for these repercussions, don't do the act that leads to these repercussions. I had a conversation with a young lady, she was probably 15 or 16, and did not understand. She had no idea how sex worked. In terms of, she had sex with her boyfriend one time and it hurt, so she thought she was pregnant. And so we kind of had this panic conversation together, like, well, what other signs make you think that you're pregnant? I just know I'm pregnant. Okay. When was your last period? 4 days ago. Okay. I don't think that you're pregnant. And if you don't know how your own body works, you're not ready.
Exactly.
You know, and again, we've put this conversation onto public schools. We put this conversation on youth ministers and pastors of churches, and parents, I think, want to just avoid it because it's uncomfortable. But this conversation has to begin at home. We've had these conversations with our kids, starting with, our daughter who's older. And again, kind of the same thing that you were talking about. No matter what you decide, no matter when, we are going to love you. There are going to be repercussions. Like, we're going to have to go to the doctor. We're going to have to get you checked out. We're going to have, like, there are things that if you want to be a responsible human being who encompasses a sexual life, there are things that you're going to have to do to make sure that you're safe and everybody else is safe. And I say everybody else. It shouldn't be like this big party. That came out really weird, so I apologize. But make sure that you and your partner are safe. So let me read to you just real quickly some of our United Methodist stances on human sexuality. So this comes from the Social Principles as found in our Book of Discipline. It's paragraph 161, starting in section G, in case you guys want to look it up. It says, and it's specifically regarding human sexuality, and it says, we affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons, right? That's our opening statement when it comes to human sexuality, that sexuality is good and it's created by God for us. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of that sacred gift. And so it also goes on further and says, sexual relations are affirmed only within the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. And again, this is the Book of Discipline as of 2016. We haven't made any amendments since 2016 because of disaffiliation and all that. And then it goes on, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. And then it goes on to say, it does not So I've gone too far. Anyway, so we deplore all commercialization, abuse, and exploitation of sex. We for strict global enforcement of laws prohibiting the sexual exploitation of children and for adequate protection, guidance, and counseling for abused children. And I think one of the things that we've come to recognize when we are repressive with sexual education is that people begin to act out in strange ways. I mean, we heard horror stories of other students who had taken these purity pledges and they never had intercourse. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, and I'll just leave it there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Guys and girls the same.
Yeah. One of my girlfriends in college said that she was a real dirty virgin. I was like, well, okay. Alrighty then.
Well, do we think that it is the church's place to have these conversations about sexuality?
I think the church can have these conversations, but I think they need to partner with parents.
Mm-hmm. What would that look like in your mind?
Maybe not a retreat weekend, but maybe some things of like how to talk with your child and start conversations.
So more of like the church leading parents into those conversations rather than the church leading the children in those conversations?
I like that plan. That's a great, brilliant plan, Matt. Brilliant plan.
I think that, that's your plan for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's, first of all, healthy, right? To encourage parents to be the lead in that conversation. Mm-hmm. What about you, Rich? Any thoughts on church sex relationships?
Yeah, I think that's how it should be. Is that the church helps? They're more of a help to the parents. And again, kids are going to be in youth groups because we know that not all parents are involved with their kids' lives. Yep. So I think it is important that youth groups do touch on those issues, but the way that it's presented is in just a totally different way. We're not talking about pearls and swines and we're not talking about like giving. I just think it's so interesting, the virginity thing. It's kind of like, are we in the Middle East where we're looking for 7 virgins when we die or something like that? Like I don't know where this idea of virginity being such this sought after whatever was. I don't know where that started and where, you know, where that originated, but you know, it's I think it is important that youth leaders do have conversations with children, and like we've stated here, that it's more about, hey, if you have done something that you consider is quote unquote messing up, or if you've done something that you feel dirty about, then here are the steps to you know, to quote unquote cleanse yourself from that, and to be made whole, to be forgiven, and to completely live a life that that you're proud of, and that's going to look different for every single person. But to lump everyone into this, you have to wear this, you have to not do this in order to be, you know, the stand up, you know, Christian whatever, is just kind of gross, you know, especially for young women, where, you know, we a lot of times we look at you know, the star football player, you know, oh, he's just a good Christian young man, and whatever. Well, you know, peel back the layers a little bit, and sometimes we see, like, you know, he's a womanizer, he's a, you know, like Amanda said earlier, like, you know, the no means no thing, they don't necessarily, you know, adhere to that. So, you know, it's those topics that I think need to be really explored when we talk about sexuality in youth culture.
So let's go back to that no means no. My kids, and I I have talked about it and said it so much to both of my kids that we kind of make a joke about it now, and maybe we've gone too far in talking about how important no means no is when I'm joking about it with them. But it is an incredibly important piece of our culture that I think, you know, obviously we've missed for a long time. And now, excuse me, and now there are accusations about, you know, accusations can be thrown around. If there's not explicit a yes, then it always means no. And this kind of quasi-consensual hookup that's happening is not, it's not, I don't know, it's not healthy. It's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't get an explicit yes, it becomes a potential for you to be accused of something, or, you know, charges brought. So some young men are kind of fearful that repercussions might come if there's not like a handwritten signed note that says, I agree to this act with this partner. XYZ. Right. And of course, I think that's a little extreme, but the reason that we've gotten to that point is because so often men have taken advantage and forced and coerced young ladies to do things that they may not be ready for or don't want.
But on the flip side, a lot of times women have said no, but they mean yes, because women are supposed to say, oh, no, I don't want that.
Southern Belle.
Yes. And so there's this muddled message. And so no always means no, and yes means yes. And if you want something, say yes. And I think,
but a young woman should never say yes.
But yes, but suppress those feelings, young lady, of desire and all those things that are human nature. But so the no means no is tricky.
It is, and I think there's no really good middle place to be on no means no, right? Like we have to say, obviously, that no means no forever. But
I think that circles back to home with if you say no, it means no. And if you get a yes, that means a yes. And
we should teach our people to always say what they mean.
Say what you want. Be clear in what you want. Tell your expectations. You know, all those sorts of things.
That sounds like that would make for a healthy relationship. You know, this idea of biblical marriage. So I want to talk about that for just a moment. I remember in the 90s when I was growing up, and there were all these conversations about human sexuality, and specifically the threat against, you know, the marital covenant. and everybody wanted to use the language of, well, biblical marriage, biblical marriage, biblical marriage. And when we talk about biblical marriage, going back to your conversation about David and Bathsheba, David was a king who was married multiple times over and saw a woman bathing naked, cleansing from her monthly time of uncleanliness. And that's scripture, that's not me. And so he lusts after her and then calls her just so he can make love to her. And when he finds out that she's pregnant as a result of his, action, he sets up a murderous plot to kill her husband so that he could have her, and it doesn't look like that baby is coming out of wedlock. That was not because he loved Bathsheba. That was because he was going to be required by Israelite law to be murdered, both of them. Although he was king, he would probably never be subject to the same law as those normal common folk. But all of this conversation about biblical marriage, we have example after example after example of how we don't even do marriage right biblically, right? From the most ancient of times, we're talking about multiple marital partners. We're talking about men and women who are not able to conceive, offering one another their male and female servants in order to procreate. We just have this strange stance that biblical marriage is this perfect, idealistic relationship, one man, one woman, perfect, happy, hunky-dory couple. And my experience in reading scripture is that is rarely the case. You talk about David, right? Had a son, Solomon, who had 300 wives and 700 concubines. Biblical marriage, right? So, we have pretended, I think, that God has just somehow flipped a switch and wants all of us to be pure. And who was it that told you guys, encouraged the true love waits, purity stuff for you? Was it parents? Was it spouses? Or not spouses, parents or friends or because I remember my parents, when they found out that I took on this period ring situation, they were like, oh my gosh, yes. I'm fully support that. When they were young people, you know what era that was? Right?
Yep. Free love, baby.
Free love. Yep. Right. So they grew up in an era where sex was just with everybody, And that was that sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s. And they wanted to make sure that I didn't experience what they experienced.
Yep.
So we as a church have this pendulum type of swing from one extreme to the other. And it's not just the church, it's basically everybody. And we just have to be careful that we never swing too far. I read an article about how instead of as a response to the true love waits, this purity culture, there is now a hookup culture that is just encouraging kind of that same conversation about free love that we were just talking about. That, there's this sexual revolution of young women who are exploring their sexuality and are being encouraged by, the media and peers on social media, especially, to just embrace your femininity and your sexuality as a woman. And I don't have anything to say to that at all. Being a man, it's not my place to tell a woman how she shouldn't practice her own sexuality until I have mine all figured out and perfected, So it's just this really weird shift in culture where we went from you have to wait to now go and sleep around and find the right guy. So we have got to, I think, quit swinging so far from one side to the other.
Yeah. As always, I think there is a balance, and I think that should be our guide is finding the balance in that, not swinging to the far right or the far left of center, but finding where center is. And that's specifically for your life, because again, it's not a one size fits all, and we shouldn't treat it as such. And I think by doing so, we've honestly, we being the church, have messed a lot of people up with their thoughts about their own sexuality, their own bodies, the body shaming and all of this and that. We're a society that is messed up in the head with that stuff. And I think the church can have a very, very positive message to go into that, and should.
don't get me wrong, I absolutely agree with the church's stance that, sexuality, it should be something that is very special and reserved.
Yeah.
Right? And so often it's just not. I mean, sex is just another tool in the arsenal to attract and to, create relationship where maybe a relationship wouldn't be if somebody wasn't craving sex, or I don't know. It's just kind of a weird situation. But so let's go ahead and wrap up. Actually, Amanda, it was fantastic having you here as a part of our conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me be a part of this conversation. It was a really good conversation, and I think one that probably will continue. So.
As it should. All right. It's been a fun conversation. Rich, as always, thank you so much for your help, your insight. I love your perspective. Same with you, Miss Amanda. I'm really thankful for both of you. So I'm hoping that we'll continue to have these conversations and that it sparks something in our audience, that people who hear this understand that the church isn't all of one mind when it comes to sexuality in general. And sex has a lot of responsibilities that come along with it. But if we're doing things correctly, we want the best for all people. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Community Cast. We hope that you were blessed by today's conversation. If you'd like to know more about Community Brookside, please feel free to visit us at our website, communitybrookside.com, or find us on your favorite social media outlet. We hope to hear from you soon. Be blessed.